Hey, so before I announce the winners of the Elmify contest, I first want to thank everybody who entered. I got so many funny and creative responses that it was really hard to narrow it down to just 8 winners. So hard, in fact, that I actually narrowed it down to 12 winners. I would have picked more, but I only have so many t-shirts and sock creatures, and as it is, part of me is having a hard time with the idea of parting with them. Silvius Petruchio, you're gonna go to good homes. Baby giraffe t-shirt. We had some good times. Now, because the contest was to introduce me to your fantasy self, I've invited my fantasy self back here to help me announce the winners. So without further ado, let's just get this over with. Are you in a hurry or something? Yeah, as a matter of fact, I've got some really important stuff lined up. Like what? Meetings and stuff? Changing the queue on my Netflix? The first 2 winners of the comment contest are Gleymmerei, whose fantasy self is a nurse at a children's hospital, and Cool Kitty 7, whose fantasy self donated money to GLAAD and adopted a baby girl. I thought it was nice to hear from some fantasy selves who practiced philanthropy, especially considering that mine is pretty self-centered. I'm sorry, but if you're going to insist on writing me lines, you could at least put them on cue cards. Make that really self-centered. The next winner is RJ King 128, whose fantasy self owns a portion of Idaho and has the power to turn Google off with a big red button. Which is cool, you know, but I've got a big red button too. That's a refrigerator magnet. It can hold up several documents at once. The next winners are Antoine J., whose fantasy self successfully survived the zombie apocalypse, and Talyaaykac, whose fantasy self works for NBC in New York City. Hey, have you worked with her? Oh yeah, she's great. Really successful. You know, it seems like a lot of people's fantasy selves are really awesome. Yeah, it does. What? The next winner is Random Channel Station, whose fantasy self had a string of bad luck and got sued when he tried to publish a book called The Michelangelo Code. Now, this reminded me of my fantasy self, who tried to push a show onto NBC about a high school chorus just days after Glee aired. I thought of it first. The video contest winners start with Blargold Alien, whose fantasy self has an alien triumvirate that helps him make decisions. The next winners are Please Don't Mind Me, whose fantasy self is a soccer player who plays by his own rules, and Gecko Momo, who illustrated the story of his fantasy self. Now, I really liked the idea of doing something like that, but one of us can't draw. I can draw just fine. Where are my ears? The next winners are The Lucky Hat, whose fantasy self was sketchy but really friggin' tall, and Adam of Neb, whose fantasy self was so much like Shay Carl that he was Shay Carl. Last but not least is Leslie Found Her Grail, who ordered her fantasy self from a cloning company, and when she was disappointed with the results, contacted the facility to try to send her fantasy self back. Now, I liked this idea a lot and was kind of envious because there's no way that I can send my fantasy self back. Hey! What the hell? That wraps up the winners, and once again I want to thank everyone who entered the contest. I had so much fun reading all the submissions and watching all the videos, and I look forward to having more contests and giveaways in the future. In the meantime, what are you eating? S'mores. Where'd you get s'mores? I'm from Fantasy World, remember? Jealous? No.